Hey everyone, this is Terry Knight. Welcome to another podcast episode. We have the amazing individual doing great things in the short-term rental space. He's a mentor, coach of the hospitality cash flow, master of government contracts, and is taking matters into his own hands and scaling his business like crazy. Please welcome Noble Crawford. Appreciate it, man.
Hey, Terry, I appreciate you having me. Thanks so much.
And thanks for taking the time to even talk to me. Appreciate it. You have an amazing story, man. So I just want to deep dive into it, straight ahead. I just want to kind of know your upbringing, like where you're from, how was it like growing up with your family, like as a kid, and just kind of go from there. Like I'm pretty intrigued.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Yeah, I was pretty, pretty what I would consider, nowadays, typical average household. Had both parents at home growing up. Had just from a kind of a blue collar working class family. Both mom stayed home some, she worked some. My dad was always gone and work and stuff. And so didn't grow up with a silver spoon, but I did have the fortunate benefit of growing up with both my parents. And living a pretty, I would say, normal to average childhood.
Nice, awesome. So what made you get into the real estate game? Like what was that moment when you started this whole big journey?
Yeah, good question. So I got actually I was married young. I was young when I got married. So me and my wife were getting ready to celebrate 28 years next month. But we were babies when we got married. I think I was 20 and she was 18, right?
Oh, wow.
So I developed the work ethic when I was young, but when I got married and had a child so early, I doubled down on that. So I was that guy that I was always working. Like there was times when I was holding down like two full-time jobs at once, like just madness, right? Because I just had to provide, right? I just had to put food on the table and stuff. But ended up getting into hospitality in the hospitality space in my earlier years of employment. And I worked for a number of different hospitality brands. So your Marriott's, your Hilton's, a number of those big brands. Did that for years, and I was actually on the kind of the event side of the business, right? So I was working the conferences and the events and meetings and stuff, and I was handling all the technology and stuff for that. And so I worked that for a number of years, and then I kind of migrated into. I did a little stint in home theater after I got out of the hotel space. So I was designing and selling home theater systems to, professional ball players and CEOs and stuff. So that was cool. And then my final stop was really kind of doing that, but on the commercial side. So then I was selling and designing systems for large scale commercial projects. And in that space, there were certain verticals that I was, kind of selling into. And one of those happened to be government, happened to be the government space. But during that time when I was working my last W-2 job, my wife, we found out that she had a brain tumor. And so obviously, we move real quickly to get surgery set up, get the operation done, and that sort of thing. And it ran into some complications during surgery. Ended up what should have been like 6 hours took like I think close to 14. She got out and everything in the ICU. She ended up flatlining like in the ICU a couple of times. And long story short, turned out she was allergic to morphine. They had on a morphine drip, post surgery, and it was like causing her organs to shut down and stuff. So, but they resuscitated her, they revived her, and everything. She's, much doing well today. Still here with us, thank God. And but during the post surgery recovery time frame, I had to decide exactly if I was going to stay home and help care for my wife, or if I was going to go back into to the job and try to keep making some more money. And at that time I was doing commission my sales are commission based. It's commission based sales, and so I decided. To me, it was kind of a no brainer. I decided I'm gonna stay home, make sure my wife, recovers fully and stuff like that. Right, that was my priority. And she was it was a lengthy, 6 8 weeks, however long it was, period. She had to relearn how to do some basic fundamental things, bringing her food to her mouth, just basic, talking without slurring, things like that. So I stayed home, but on the tail end of that, I ended up getting called back into a company wide sales meeting. And so I'm back in the office for this particular meeting, and I just got berated by the CEO. I just got ripped by him for like having these dismal sales numbers for the previous like 4 to 6 weeks. And the kicker is like everybody in the country knew what was going on. Like everybody knew that I was home with my wife and she had just had brain surgery and she was recovering and all that. And he just proceeded to just unload on me, and it was humiliating and everything. And so I had made a decision in that moment that I was no longer going to be holding to working on someone else's timetable. And I was going to buy my time freedom back so that I could be there for my family when and if they needed me. And so, so I just, at that point, I just put my head down and went to work and ended up cashing out on a couple of big, sales projects and ended up leaving, man. And shortly after that, I started a marketing agency, and I ran that for a couple of years, and then I was introduced to short-term rentals, and that's where it all kind of started.
Oh, wow. Amazing story. I'm glad your wife's doing well. And
Thank you.
God bless God with that. And your wife's doing amazing things, I'm sure of it. I can imagine what that's even like, right? So just the fact that you had to work and take care of your wife at the same time and then have to deal with that when you had to get back to it, that broader meeting, you took control of your life basically back. And I see that time and time again with people working W-2s, right? And it's a big game changer once you make that switch and double down, like you say, especially when you have kids, hit the ground running and you just make things happen. So
Absolutely.
you mentioned that you work with the big brands like Marriott and Hilton. What was the big takeaways working with those brands? Because that's pretty huge, man.
Really, to be honest, that's where I cut my teeth in the hospitality space, right? And so, so I learned a lot about guest services because we were, not only did I work on the event side, but when I first got into the hospitality space, I was working like front desk, night audit, that type of role, right? So I was learning kind of the guest experience, but an opportunity came open on the conference side, and I jumped in and I took it, and just happened to be a technology opportunity doing the live events. And so I got to see multiple sides of that whole hospitality business, right? And being able to be in these meetings and interacting with the guests at different levels, right? So typically these were, companies coming in and holding big conferences and big events, right? And small ones too, right? Anything from, a dozen people to, upwards of a few thousand, several thousand people. And so just being able to see the hotel operation holistically, and the different, different aspects of it that make, an entire hotel property perform, that's stuff that, that will serve you well as a short-term rental operator, because you really have a deep sense of, how guest management, guest service, and things like that operate.
Cool. That's awesome. So you mentioned that you jumped into the short-term rentals. Like, what was like your first couple deals looking like? Was it rental arbitrage? Was it, co-hosting? Like, what was
Yeah,
your
yeah.
niche?
Good question. Good question. So we first jumped in. So how I got into it, I was introduced to a gentleman, and I ended up watching some YouTube videos, and then there was this mastermind that was happening out in California, and it was these STR operators that were getting together, and they were holding this kind of weekend retreat mastermind. And so my wife and I, we were like, man, this sounds kind of interesting. Let's go out and check it out. So we flew out there, went to this weekend mastermind thing, and kind of learned the ins and outs of what these operators were doing in their business. And then we said, we could do this back home in Texas, right? And so we came back and put our heads down and went to work. And what we learned at that mastermind was primarily centered around the arbitrage model, right? And so at the time, that's all that we knew was the arbitrage model. So that's what we did. We executed on arbitrage, right? And then, and started going out and having those conversations, with landlords and property management companies. And I'll tell you, as many people can attest to that have gone through the arbitrage thing, it takes work on the front end, right? It's not flip a switch and you got some doors, right? We went through a lot of no's before we kind of dialed our pitch in and really understood what their pain points were, and were able to have a intelligent conversation with them about those. And so, that's how we started.
Holy crap. Yeah, we still can't relate to that because we're still trying to get deals and we're getting those. So I totally agree with you with that one. But how long did it take before you get your first property as a rental arbitrage? How long did you think that took you guys after
Good
that
question.
mastermind?
Um, I would say I too long. That's the short answer, right? So to be honest, probably about between 4 to 6 months, probably around 5 months.
Okay.
But because I was so here's the thing. So I'm a recovering perfectionist. That's one, right? Um, two, I was a professional procrastinator, right? And you would think being a commissioned salesperson, I'm experienced in sales, I'm experienced in talking to people, this, that, and the other. Man, I like no was like kryptonite to me, right? And so I felt when I started, I was like, coming from a company where I had business cards, I had brochures, I had all of this tangible stuff that I could leave with people and make myself look representative of the company that I was with. I didn't have that in this space, so I felt like I needed those things, right? So of course I had that span of time, that first 3 months, where I'm more worried about, getting my business cards, my brochure, my website, and this and that. And at the end of the day, to be honest with you, it was just fear. It was fear of rejection, fear of no. And when I got over that hurdle, that's when we began to take off. When I said, okay, I need to focus on having these conversations and get over the fact that, it's a no is not necessarily no, it's not right now, or it's not yet. And it really me taking the position of, look, I'm doing you a service by bringing you this opportunity, and you're not doing me one, right? So when I developed that mindset, things began to move up and to the right. But it was probably about 5 months before I, really nailed that first opportunity. But I was milling around for 3 months, doing it the wrong way.
I can contest, man. We all have that mental mindset that doesn't kick in, right? So I totally agree with you with that one. Well, how much, okay, you got your first one after 5 months after, figuring out the mindset. How many more did you get after that? Like you hit that first one, you're like, wow, I'm making what, 2 grand, 3 grand a month? And then you're like, okay, second property, third. How's that
Yeah.
process like for
So
you?
good question. So the first, because the first few that we got, because we got more than one the first time. So the first few that we got helped us kind of first kind of get acclimated to the space, because it's one of those things, you don't know what you don't know when you're kind of getting new and getting started, right? So really kind of getting adjusted to what is this STR space, what does it look like actually managing properties, guests, the whole 9 yards, right? And so we got those first few under our belt, and we began to like put some of our basic systems into place, find a cleaner, find some of those, basic elements that we would need to run this operation. And then after that, I was very intentional with my next move, right? So I knew out of the gate, like I wanted to do apartments, right? Because that's what was introduced to us, again, arbitrage and multifamily arbitrage, utilizing apartment complexes. And so I said, how can I get in front of these apartment owners, these syndicators, these developers, because they're the people that I want to do business with. Those are who I need to be aligned with. And so at that point, I became intentional about going to real estate meetups. Okay. So I would attend real estate meetups as often as I could, because I wanted to be in front of those guys, and I wanted to develop a relationship with them, right? And being able to explain to them the benefits of working with someone like me, like with an operator like myself. And that ended up being kind of a catalyst for us that really kind of helped us take off. Was meeting those syndicators and developers and property owners and landlords at these real estate investment meetup events.
Oh, wow. Okay. I didn't think about that one. And networking is important, right? Wow.
Absolutely.
No brainer. Was these local meetups though, where you lived, or was it out of state? Like, did it
Yeah, so we're in
matter?
the Dallas Fort Worth area, And
Mhm.
so yes, they were predominantly local in and around Dallas Fort Worth area. And I would try to hit one like at least once a week. And so I was very consistent. And what was ironic was at that time, I would typically find that I was the only one in the room talking about STRs with that knowledge base. And even to this day, as more common as this space is now, as more people are aware of it, you would be surprised that you can still go to meetups to this day and be that person in the room that is the STR person. And that's the key. Is developing those relationships with the people that you want to do business with. So yeah, that's huge.
So, what's your take on the pushback I said, or the negative impact of STR, right? You go to these meetups, some people may know what that means and they get turned off. Like, how do you approach that in a different way to not scare them off, but have that deeper conversation either there or
Yeah.
later on?
So when you say negative impact, are you talking about in terms of like the press and the media, or are you talking about in terms of like how it impacts housing?
Both. So, for instance, when you do STR, right? Like we talk to owners all the time. They're scared of, hey, my property's going to be damaged. There's too much traffic coming in and out. I have residential like people staying. I don't want that to interfere with what's going on, right? Like it gets a little questionable, especially with certain owners that we've talked to in the past, myself in particular.
Yeah, yeah, good question, good question. So I would say first and foremost, it starts with like understanding what those pain parts are. So you articulated a couple of them, right? So now having those conversations, you understand like what they're going to come back at you with, right? So then it really gets down to understanding how to position yourself as the company that can solve that pain point for them, right? So here's a good example. So first and foremost, I always like what my students that are getting started, I always recommend that they start with smaller owner operator controlled, landlords and owner operator controlled properties, right? And they may even have a small property management company attached to them, but start there because those are typically small business owners and they understand kind of that small business kind of mentality, right? Whereas the bigger, what you would call a REIT, real estate investment trust, those bigger Class A multifamily 200 unit plus, they have a different, they have a different objective than the smaller owner operator, right? And so they had as you know since they have a different objective, they have a different criteria of the type of person they're looking to work with, right? So starting with that smaller owner controlled operator. Now, understanding that first and foremost, one of their biggest pain points is going to be my existing tenant base. That's their bread and butter. That's what they're accustomed to. They don't want to disrupt that under any cost, right? Any cost. They don't want to disrupt that existing tenant base, right? And so it's understanding how to frame the conversation in a way where they understand, hey, the type of clientele that I am going to be looking to provide, some short-term accommodations for are the same type of clients that you'll be happy to have at your property as long-term tenants. Okay. So notice in just that 10 seconds there, I did not say guest. I said client, right? I did not say Airbnb. I said accommodations, right? So a lot of that is the language that you're using, right? So yeah, you can tell I'm a sales guy, right? So I have background, but a lot of that is the language that they're using. So it's the psychology of words, right? So using language that psychologically they're more receptive to, right? So when we're talking about the type of client that we want to provide these short accommodations for, we're talking about high 5-figure and 6-figure earners, right? That's the type of tenant that they want in their community, right? And then, well, they may have some concerns or questions about, what happens if there's an issue or a party or if there's damage or this, that, and the other, right? And so you already want to know those answers in your head so you can address them. Sometimes you can address them on the front end before they ask them, right? But if they do ask, right, you want to make sure you can answer it in a way that it, again makes you the solution for that problem that they're imagining in their head, right? So in the instance of, the type of guest that we're talking about, we'll go through our whole vetting process and how we vet them, right? And making sure that that they're vetted more stringent than your typical 12-month tenant, right? So that you can rest assured that there's not going to be anyone on property that hasn't been properly vetted. But not only that, there's not going to be anyone on property that isn't on our list and that hasn't been approved by us, right? And so that's another thing. So as far as like parties, so we walk them through our security process, right? So parties vetting prevents having the wrong type of guests who want to come in your property and turn up, right? But having the right security protocols in place, right, helps kind of double down on that, right? And everything from your security systems to your cameras, to your motion detectors, noise systems, all of that stuff. So we'll explain to them we have the technology and kind of the ecosystem, if you will, of products and services in place to be able to prevent any type of potential, gathering of multiple people, if you will. We don't say parties, right? That's a negative word. It brings about a negative connotation in their mind. So we say gatherings. We say, gatherings of more people than are allowed. And then we want to address like if there's damage, right? And so the fact that, we have a policy that has a $1 million per door policy, where we're going to name you and your property as the additionally insured on that to make sure you're 100% protected. Everything, including the public pool and the public areas, right? And so when you're able to address those pain points with them, where they can bring the temperature down and start to and start to position your company in a way where they know, hey, this is not as problematic as I thought that it could be. That will begin to change the number of no's that you get.
You put it right on the mark, man. It's funny you mentioned that because I'm gonna give you a little quick story right quick. Multi-family home. It was actually a new apartment complex, luxury, like over 200 doors. Literally just opened up like in 2 months. Like it was 2 months in, and they weren't even like barely 25% full at all. Went in there, like I had a good conversation with the consultant, leasing consultant. I went through like several rounds of people, and like the thing that got us stuck was we had to send an email to them to send it to the owner of that developing company, and they just shut us down. And I was like, well, I just want to have a conversation with them to just like you mentioned, it's best to have it in person too. But like, I felt like that killed the deal because even though I got the initial offer in and I was good, it still took someone at an upper level to say yes or no, and they just shot it down. And that one still hurts, but hope to get in sooner or later. They do offer 30 plus days only though, and we want to do short term, like or couple
Right.
days here and there, nothing crazy.
Right. So
But
textbook example, awesome example. I'm glad you brought that up, right? Because it goes back to what I was saying initially. And even those larger class A's, um, a lot of times those will be bought by multifamily investors, right? And they change hands. If you think about it, they change hands usually about every 3 to 5 years. Okay. That's kind of the typical turn. And they'll change ownership, right? So properties are always changing ownership. So when you're in the room with those investors and you're building that relationship, developing that relationship with them, and they understand your business model because you've taken the time to educate them, then when they have the next opportunity, Class A, B, or otherwise comes available, and they have an occupancy issue problem, or it's a new development even, right? Because developers fit in this mold. It's a new development even, and there's that lease up period like you described, they were at 25%, but they got that lease up period where they're trying to get up to 95% occupancy. There's significant opportunities there, but they're traditionally based on relationships. Right. And so, and then the conversations that we were having after I was going to those meetups were at the ownership level. So we weren't dealing with property management. Right. So problem solved. But that's a good example.
oh damn, yeah, that's that makes perfect sense. Perfect sense. You mentioned about changing of ownerships. How come they change every 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, so that's been my experience. Some of them will hold them longer, sometimes 7. Your Grant Cardones might hold them 10, right? But typically, most investors are coming in. If it's an apartment community, maybe they're doing a value add play. So, maybe they're coming in and they're looking how they can make improvements and raise the NOI, a net operating income over time. And then because as an investor, they're making money on the acquisition and they're making money on the disposition. They're making money when they buy and when they sell and during that time that they hold typically. So they'll get it up from the value that they purchased it at, they'll get it up to a higher value and then sell it and make some more money on the back end of the sale. So they typically, in my experience, that 3 to 5 year range is pretty normal.
Gotcha. So my next question is, you should be like a you should be in the millions by now. So how come, have you ever thought about, hey man, like I'm gonna go purchase my multifamily home and just
Man,
convert it into an STR? Like hands down, that's our goal in our company too.
Yep.
But like I'm sure you've thought about that and maybe that's one of your goals, maybe. Like I don't know.
Yeah.
What's your thought
Timing is
process?
impeccable. Timing is impeccable, and your questions are good. So the short answer is yes. To the extent that we are about to get involved in syndication, and beginning in Q4. So here in very short order, and so we'll be participating as general partners in some in some value add community purchases with some other partners and other limited partners as well. So yes, that is in fact in play as we speak.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. But convert it into an STR or just residential only?
Yeah. So great question. So the beautiful thing is that now being on the ownership side of those communities, I will have the good fortune of being able to designate a certain percentage of those where we can run the play, and converting those to some STRs. So yes, absolutely.
Holy crap. That's awesome, man. Congrats. Congrats on that one.
Thank you.
I need to step up my game here. Wow. That's crazy. When you mentioned multifamily when you first got in, like how many doors did you guys get initially when you started that journey?
We just out of the gate 3, right? And then I think the next one was like a duplex, and then we went back to multifamily, and then over time we just kept adding and adding a combination of those traditional multifamilies, and then purchase assets too. So purchase duplexes too.
Okay, dang. All right. All right. So well, I want to get into this whole government contract stuff, man. I keep hearing about you gave some good tips at the STR Wealth Conference earlier this year. And like, can you kind of elaborate like how you got started with that and how you were able to kind of deep dive into that and make that a great part of your business?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So initially, the direct booking stuff was not really started with government contracts. So there were other verticals that we were kind of looking at, that we're doing direct bookings at first, right? Before the government contract stuff. So we were doing stuff in, healthcare. We were doing stuff in higher education. We were doing stuff in the relocation space, disaster recovery, stuff like that, right? And then even some local stuff. And so my background, again, going back, my background in that previous W-2 I had, I was responsible for selling into different verticals, those ones I just named, and then also military and federal government, right? And so part of that, because I was with a fairly new entity at the time, part of that was getting us set up to do business at those levels, right? And so that's where I kind of learned how to go through that process, if you will. And so then one day, like I said, I had that light bulb moment where why am I not doing this, for this industry? It's a different product or service, right? And it's the same process of getting set up. And so we went through that process. But the first one was an opportunity where we had some existing units. And there was an opportunity with a facility that was not too far from where we were. And it was a situation where a company had landed a contract where they were doing pilot and mechanic recertification and training. Okay. And so pilots would come in 30-day increments to do their recertification, and mechanics would come in 2-week increments to do their training and recertification. And this was like consistency year round, with the exception of like Christmas and stuff like that. It was consistent like year round, in and out, like pilots and mechanics coming in and out. And so it just so happened that this particular opportunity was within blocks of where we were at. And so I went through the arduous process, of finding out who the decision maker was, because I had to get through some gatekeepers and things like that. And now I kind of teach the method I use, a LinkedIn tracing method. But I just kind of reverse engineer getting to this decision maker, and getting in front of her and saying, hey, this is who we are and what we do. We understand that you're currently using limited stay and extended stay hotels to to offer to these pilots and mechanics, and we'd like to offer our product or service and get on that list as an option, for them to be able to stay at our properties. And of course, as you know, our product is a superior product than a traditional hotel room, right? And so when we were able to navigate that and get in on that opportunity, that's really where it catapulted from, because that specific company has so these government contracts, our entity didn't have the contract with the government, right? We were coming up under someone that was holding that umbrella contract for the training, but under that umbrella contract with for the training and stuff, there was a lodging component under there where they were, housing these trainees that were coming in, and pilots and mechanics. And so that's what we wanted to come in under, was that lodging piece and kind of compete with those hotels. And that's kind of where it started. It's kind of where it took off from.
That's freaking crazy. And like government contracts, I would never thought about that. Have you ever not thought of, but have you ever heard of a minority business MBE certification? Certification basically for minorities.
Yes,
You
sir.
can apply for that, and guess what? Anyone that's trying to meet that quota, you'll be first in line. So I'm not sure if you ever took advantage of that yet, or since you're kind of down that whole avenue of trying different things, or
Yeah, so traditionally, you're gonna find your disadvantaged business enterprise stuff at the local and state level. It can play an impact in terms of at the federal level if you're engaged in a bid opportunity, or maybe it's got, they'll attach some weight to, being a disadvantaged business enterprise. But more often than not, those types of opportunities you're going to find the most of at the local and state level.
gotcha.
But
And
definitely advantageous to to go through the process of becoming an MWBE, even getting their 8A SBA certification for sure.
oh, SBA certification, that's for
Yeah.
small.
So there's one called 8A, 8 Alpha. So an 8A certification is through the Small Business Administration,
Mhm.
and those work at the federal level as well. And so there are different types of government contracts. Some are biddable, some are non-biddable, right? They have what they call set asides. They have what they call sources sought. Those are typically your non-biddables. But if you're holding an 8A certification, sometimes the departmental agency will come directly to you because they're looking to fulfill that specific order with a disadvantaged type of enterprise.
Oh wow, I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So something that struck to me, I use LinkedIn as well. You mentioned you have a little system for that. Um, I'm guessing you guys use Sales Navigator to tie that in to get your ideal customers. There's other softwares out there, but can you kind of chime in to let people know like how important LinkedIn is as a whole? Because I think that kind of falls to like it's not as important as people talk about Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. LinkedIn's like on the bottom of it, but little do they know, like you mentioned, LinkedIn could be a powerful tool to use to get leads.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because as you already know, like LinkedIn is the platform for business to business communications, right? Obviously we're all individuals. It's always about building those relationships, but LinkedIn is really that professional kind of like business social platform for developing those relationships. And then the unique thing is that there are I don't want to misquote this, but I want to say there are over like 2 million plus active like federal employees on LinkedIn, right? So there's no shortage of people that you can and should be connecting with. One of the key things is making sure that your profile is built out properly and is representative of the product and service that you're offering. But then also, go out and build yourself. If you have an entity, go out and build yourself a company page, right? Because when you're going to transact business with the government, just like just like any other business type, the government's those people, they're going to do their homework, right? So they're going to look you up, they're going to research your company, this, that, and other. And so having that social proof, if you will, on LinkedIn can be beneficial, right? Because it just proves out like who you are, what you do, your company does, that sort of thing. So yes, but then Sales Navigator, some of those paid kind of options that will help you, get in contact with people a little bit easier. Those are helpful as well.
Awesome, awesome. So you mentioned there's different verticals, like you said, healthcare, insurance, stuff like that. Which one from your experience you think was the best, like worked for you? Was it just the government contracts or was it a blend of each vertical?
Hands down, the government stuff is the most lucrative, right? Um, and because if you kind of think about it like this, like the government has the largest accounts payable globally. The U.S. government has the largest accounts payable of any operation or organization or entity on the planet. They spend ridiculous sums of money, and a lot of that money is spent in contracts, right? And that's why small business is so important in the U.S. because small business, even large businesses, they do a lot of business with the government through contracts, and so so those opportunities are the most lucrative, the most profitable. Um, but they require work. Just like going and getting those yeses, requires some work. This is not too dissimilar, right? So it requires some knowledge and some work, and then some execution on the front end to put yourself in position to get those opportunities.
Gotcha. So off these government contracts, how much on average can a person make if they got a contract from the government for, is it
Well,
depending on the
actually,
doors or is it, I'm not
yeah,
sure if that works.
it depends on a couple of different things. So it'll depend on the opportunity. And so what you have is you have the agencies. So I'll just pick one, like Department of Defense, right? Department of Defense. Under the Department of Defense or under the department, there's a specific agency in that department that is responsible for writing the contract, right? So they're putting the whole contract together, the scope of work, the whole 9 yards. Okay. And then within that agency, there's a single individual, which is called the contracting officer, that is responsible for the failure or success of that contract, right? Once it gets awarded and making sure that it performs properly and this and that, right? So the contracting officer is the single sole person representing the government that is over that contract, right? And so it depends on the size of the contract can depend on a number of different variables, right? Um, but and it also depends on whether you have a direct contract, your entity in the government, that's called a prime contract, or one similar to what I was describing, which is more of a subcontract opportunity where another larger company is holding a big contract and you come up under them and provide a piece of your service in a subcontract capacity, right? And so it depends on those types of things. But to answer your question more specifically, I've seen opportunities that they could easily 5 figures, and I've seen opportunities that are 7 figures, right? So I'll give you an example of a colleague up in the Northeast. He landed a contract that was a 1 year contract with a 5 year auto renewal, which is not uncommon with the government space. So it was a 1 year contract, it was for 3 million for that 1 year, but it was a 5 year auto renewal. If they performed successfully that first year, the auto renewal did kick in. It turned to a 6 year, $18 million opportunity, right? And it took 37 doors to fulfill the scope of that contract. And that was it. 37 doors. And so that can give you an idea of what's possible, right? And there's other opportunities. Recently I was working with someone for opportunity out in Oregon. Because people think, oh, these have to be in urban areas. No, they're all over, right? So this opportunity was in Oregon. It was through the Department of the Navy. It was a 5 year opportunity. It was a multi 7 figure deal. So it depends. It could be a smaller one. It could be a $50,000 deal. that could only last like 4 to 6 months, right? But you can turn that down. You know what I'm saying? So, it depends is the answer, but they can get pretty high.
Holy crap. 37 doors, 18 million. Congrats to that person. Wow. So how do you like, didn't they have to have the 37 doors in order to like bid for that, obviously? Like it wasn't just like, oh, like let me get the contract, let me go try to get 37 doors.
That's exactly what happened. They got the deal first, and then went and got the doors to fulfill it.
Well, like how? How do you get 30 no, like how do you get 37 doors? Like I'm sure
Yeah,
you're on the time
it was
frame,
a multifamily. It was a multifamily deal. So
multi-family deal, so you probably have to
yeah,
go talk to.
yeah, they
Okay,
had to go through a multifamily channel, to be
gotcha.
able to get the doors to fulfill the contract. But see, here's the thing, because this is what we've done too. So the first the one I explained earlier, with the positive mechanics, that was our first one. The second one was the reverse of that, where the opportunity came first, then the doors came. But here's the deal. That's an entirely different conversation when you're bringing to a multifamily property owner a multi-year, very lucrative deal, right? Where they're not having to worry about their occupancy for a while, right? And then when they get ready to go sell the asset, if they sell it while the contract is still in place, that's good for them and that's good for the buyer. So then it becomes a win-win-win. So it's a totally different conversation when you're bringing a deal to the community as opposed to having the doors, then go and try to find a deal.
Holy crap. Obviously you gotta show proof of funds before you start talking to these owners and stuff like that,
Yeah, well,
probably.
so here's the thing. So you can do a deal. You can get the doors contingent on getting the contract, right?
Mm.
And so the way it would work is essentially a lease would only kick in and become viable once you have the contract with the government. Once it's a done deal and it's inked and you get it, then at that point the lease kicks in, right? So the communities aren't worried about like, do you have the funds to fulfill the length of this contract, because the government contract itself is what is going to fulfill that financial obligation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Holy
it's a different
crap.
conversation at that level.
Wow. Yeah, big opportunities apparently. Whew. You already answered my question about how long the contracts. It varies. 4 months, 6 months, multi-year, depending on if you hit the quota.
Yep.
I'm guessing the government, just like anyone else, they ACH or direct deposit you the funds, not
Yep.
check or
Yep.
anything.
Yep, Chip, we're gonna get those deposited. Now here's one thing I will say, because a lot of people don't understand this on the front end. So the government typically pays in arrears. Okay, so that means that you're not gonna get your money up front for that first 30 days worth of stays, right?
Oh,
So yeah, so that's when it comes in handy to negotiate with the community that first month or two off, where you're not paying that first month or two, because the government's going to pay you in arrears. They're going to pay you 30 days in arrears through the life cycle of the contract, right? And so if
mhm.
you're in a situation where you got, 2 dozen doors and you got to get those furnished and ready to go and online, and you got 8 weeks to do it, and you're not going to see a check, until 30 days after they get there, that can create an issue. So you need to understand that up front. The government does pay 30 days in arrears.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. And what percentage do you think with your business or anyone that like doing the same thing you're doing, is OTA, government contracts, and direct booking, however you want to word it?
Yeah, so ours is over 95%, because we those other verticals that I described, like that's a lot of the make up the business too. So only two of those opportunities are those contract opportunities. The rest of those are in and among those other verticals. And so you're talking 42 doors, three of them remaining on the OTAs, and the rest all direct.
Oh, wow. So you said some are government contracts, some are healthcare. How would someone get into the healthcare like space of that? Is it just networking as well, like online with events
Yeah,
or?
so good question. So when we started, of course we know a lot more now, but when we started, we just started walking into hospitals and saying, "Hey, this is who we are. This is a product and service we provide. We know that you have." Now let me back up a little bit, because I did have a little bit of knowledge, um, pre-STR business about how it kind of works. So I sold into that space, right? The healthcare and higher education space. And so one of our first opportunities was working with a medical a school of medicine at a university. Um, and so these postgraduate students were in medical school, but they're responsible for providing their own housing at that level, right? And so that was one of our first opportunities. But then we were made aware of the whole traveling nurse thing through that channel, right? And so I knew about medical students and their housing needs, which is really kind of where we cut our teeth on the healthcare. But on the heels of that, we learned about this traveling nurse. I didn't know that was the thing, right? Until I was in the space and we were catering to students. And so then we were like, well, we just need to go to hospitals and find out how we can get these traveling nurses to come stay with us. I mean, so that's how we started. We started by walking into hospitals, going, talking to HR, talking to the charge nurses, talking to these different people. Fast forward, as recently as last year, I learned about another aspect dealing with the agencies directly. My friend Jesse Vasquez, he's on Instagram. He teaches that whole play with the dealing with the healthcare placement agencies, and they're placing these traveling healthcare professionals and covering their housing at a premium, right? And so during COVID, when everybody was getting some action from the healthcare space, we got our fair share too, because there was so much activity in that space. But then people don't realize also in healthcare, there's other demographics of healthcare, right? Then you get on the patient side. Right. So what happens is you have patients a lot of times that are having these long-term health procedures done. Maybe they're battling cancer, whatever the case is, and their families are coming into town or coming into the community for months at a time because they want to be there with their loved one, and they need furnished accommodations. They don't need an empty apartment or empty house that they got to go out and fill up. They need furnished accommodations. They're already dealing with the illness of a loved one or something like that. And so that is not a burden they want to take on, is moving in somewhere, getting housing. So a lot of them are staying in hotels, unfortunately. And so there's a very unique niche opportunity in the healthcare space by accommodating those families, supporting those loved ones that have terminal illnesses and things, and also children's hospitals. That's a huge one because children will be in the hospital for lengthy periods of time, and their parents typically have to find accommodations on their own. So you could partner with like Ronald McDonald houses, place like that, in different children's houses. And a lot of times there's organizations that will help them pay for or offset those accommodation costs, and they'll pay you directly as the host. So there's a lot of action within the healthcare space, and that's just one, right? Higher education is another. And I'm not necessarily talking about like student housing, although we have engaged with international students and very successfully, but more so talking about like faculty and staff, right? So you have faculty that will visit and staff that will visit a campus, not visit, but they will come during an academic semester or an entire academic school year, but they don't live there. Right. And so they're traveling in to teach for that specific period of time. You have doctoral candidates, research assistants, graduate level students, things like that. So there's a whole different demographic inside of higher education outside of your typical like student for your student housing type situation. And then, like you mentioned earlier, local and state government, military, that's another big one. Relocation is huge. I could talk on and on, but you get the idea.
Holy crap. Okay. Yeah, I didn't know the healthcare can go that deep. So that's a good point. And for anyone that's trying to deep dive into getting into these niches or verticals, the best bet is, like you said, old school, just go inside these places and start having conversations with HR and whoever's in charge. Would that be the same for government contracts too?
Yeah.
Other than
So
LinkedIn and stuff
yeah.
like
So
that?
so good question. Good question. Right. So now I leverage LinkedIn. Right. So
Hmm.
I do less cold visits and things like that and cold calling than I used to in the beginning. And so now I leverage LinkedIn pretty heavily, and you can generate a lot of lead activity there.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with you with that one. Well, dang, I mean, oh, I just overwhelmed with good knowledge, man. Like, damn. Geez. So, what if someone wanted to reach out to you and get mentorship or coaching by you? Like, what would be the best way to get in contact? Like, what's the best way to get to you?
Yeah,
Just have that
absolutely.
conversation.
Probably the easiest way is through Instagram. I'm always checking my DMs. I get a lot of messages in there, and that's typically the first place people start. And then if they're interested in like something that I have going on, coaching or training or something like that, then we'll jump on a call. And because it's not just like, I know some coaches, they open up their coaching programs at different intervals throughout the year, but mine is more like kind of interview based. And so I'll sit down with the person, get to know them a little bit, make sure one that the program I have is a good fit for where they are, and then vice versa too. And so so we'll have a conversation around that, and then kind of go from there. But yeah, Instagram's probably the best place to hit me in the DMs.
Your DMs, and what's your Instagram handle? I'm gonna put
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
link below, but what's
So it's
the
Noble, Noble dot Crawford, Crawford dot the number 3. So noble.crawford.3. That's where they can hit me up.
awesome. And what's like your next plan, man? Like we're ending almost end of the year, right? We're getting into October, November, December. Like what's your end goal by the end of this year for you and your company?
So the end goal is to be actively involved on the first syndication project. So that was always a Q4 goal. So coming up into Q4. So that is, I feel very confident strongly about that. And that's going to take place. And then I would say alongside that, a very close second. So because I'm coaching now, and I'm going to be coaching for just right at a year, a little over a year. But I get jazzed up to see other people, have win and stuff and have their own wins. And so really just kind of supporting the students, and getting them to a place to work and get some of these wins as well. So yeah, those are my goals.
Awesome, awesome. Random subject though. Have you been on vacation this year, man? Like, have you just chilled with the family and just like take it easy, or are you just hardcore working like the
No,
rest of
no,
us?
no. I move around. I move around. Yeah. So I've did a couple of vacations this year. So yeah, that's one thing. I'll get it in one way or the other. So most definitely.
Cool, cool, cool. Appreciate it. So thanks everyone for listening. This is Noble Crawford. Please check him out. Hit him in the DMs. He will definitely help you to scale in the STR business, and any insights. This man's just the real deal, and recommend him highly. So thanks everyone for tuning in. And if you have any questions, just let me know and I'll refer you to Noble.
Thanks so
Thanks.
much, Terry.